Hey, grade 10s. Today we are looking at the cell cycle as it relates to cancer. So we're going to talk about a few of the concepts that have been just briefly mentioned before. This lesson is really important for the cancer assignment, which you will see pop up on Wednesday on Google Classroom. That's going to be really the last assignment that we do in this course, aside from our biology summative reflection. So keep an eye out for that. The first thing I wanted to go over was DNA. So I'm sure we've all heard before that DNA contains the information or the instructions. So what we're looking at here is a bit of information about that. In elementary school, you might have said the nucleus is like the brain of the cell or something to that effect. So what makes the nucleus the brain of the cell? And really what that is that that's where the DNA is found. So DNA stands for this big long word, deoxyribonucleic acid. And so we look at the structure of DNA a lot more in grade 11 and 12 biology. So we'll save that for now, but we do want to talk a little bit about how it relates to the cell cycle and to cancer. So DNA in each cell of our body should be identical to one another. So whether I look at a skin cell or a muscle cell or the cells in your hair follicles, all of those should have identical DNA. And really what that is identical instructions. So the instructions are held in genes, which I'm going to tell you about down below. So this little black and white diagram on the side, it's meant to show you kind of a close-up version of a chromosome. This one is duplicated. That's why it looks like an X. And then if we zoom in even further, many hundreds of times, we're going to see a double helix. Looks like a little bit of a ladder. Again, we're going to talk more about the structure of DNA next year in grade 11 bio, but for now, we're just going to focus on these small sections called genes. And really important are when we do have mistakes in the DNA, we call those mutations. And mutations might have no effect at all. So many of our cells have mutations and nothing happens negative to us. But in some cases, they can lead to cancer. And so we're going to talk about how that can happen here. You're going to do a bit more research of that in that little assignment that I mentioned. So looking at cell division and what that has to do with genes. So first I want to just tell you about what a gene is. Genes are those small sections on the chromosome. So like I mentioned up here, it's little sections of the chromosomes. And humans have like 20 to 25,000 different genes. They all have different jobs. So I mentioned right here, genes have instructions for every process that happens in our body. So one gene is responsible typically for one thing that happens. So as I mentioned before, there are some genes that actually control cell division because like I said, genes control everything that happens. They are the instruction manual. And if those genes that control cell division have a mutation, the cell may not divide at a normal pace or a normal rate. Okay, it's not going to be following the regular sort of process that it should. So throughout interphase, there are usually what we call checkpoints, especially in G2 after the DNA has been copied after S phase. And so we're essentially checking for mutations. And the cell will fix most of those mutations ahead of cell division, okay? And I mentioned in a previous lesson, if it cannot fix it, the cell will sort of self-destruct. It will go into what's called apoptosis. So that step is really important because if you make a cell that has the wrong information, it's possible that that cell could start rapidly dividing, okay? And that's what's going to lead to, we'll talk about soon, is tumors. So I want to just focus on mutations for a minute or two here. Mutations are mistakes to the DNA, like I mentioned earlier, and they kind of fall under these two categories, induced or spontaneous. Induced meaning that they're caused by something external, some type of environmental factor. So examples that you might have heard of, radiation, such as UV radiation from the sunlight. Different chemicals can cause mutations to the DNA. So for example, in cigarette smoke, there's lots of chemicals in there that are known to actually cause damage to DNA. And the last one I mentioned here is some viruses. So this is not all viruses, but there is one popular example called the HPV virus, human papillomavirus, that can cause mutations to the DNA. That's the one that causes genital warts or cervical cancer. So that's one that you might have heard about before. So on the side here, I just want to show you really quickly. Here is like a normal DNA helix. And then here's one after UV light has hit it, and there is a break in the DNA. Okay, that break shouldn't be there, so we consider that a mistake or a mutation. The other one is a spontaneous mutation. So it's possible for mistakes to happen when the DNA is copying itself. Those mistakes are few and far between. The cell is actually really, really good at copying itself perfectly. It makes a mistake like 1 per 1 million. So it's a very small mutation rate, but it's possible. Also, sometimes we have mistakes from our families, which are just in our genes that we've inherited. So we now know that there are some genes, such as BRCA1, it's BRCA1, which can increase the likelihood of breast cancer, for example. So there are those types of things that we can inherit from our family as well. So depending on what these mistakes are, as I mentioned, the cell will try its best to address those mistakes and to fix them before cell division can happen. In the event that that doesn't happen, we can have what are called tumors form. And the other part to this is that we should have cells that are specialized. We should have cells that have a job and that match their surroundings. So a skin cell should be very, very similar, if not the exact same, to all the other skin cells around it, for example. But when they divide uncontrollably, when they don't follow the rules of cell division and the cell cycle, they can develop into tumors. And tumors are essentially growths. Okay. Now, not every tumor is bad. We have what are called benign tumors. Those are generally harmless to you. A lot of people see them pop up as like moles on their skin. If you're unsure, of course, your doctor can check that out by removing it and checking it out. But the ones that we do have to worry more about are called malignant tumors. And these are cancerous, what we consider cancerous tumors. They have the ability to spread to other parts of the body. And that spreading, we have a special name for it. It's called metastasis. So in the videos that I have posted below this lesson, you're going to see there are some videos there that actually show how metastasis works, how it can move through the body. So I'm going to let you guys check that out for more information. And down here, I just want to show sort of what the formation of a tumor might look like. So over here, we have a genetic change, a mutation. So here's a normal cell. And to indicate that a change has happened, it's just a little bit darker in the cancer cell. So normal cells, like we talked about in lesson 4, they follow the cell cycle. They follow sort of this checklist of steps. They're very controlled. They do not just replicate constantly. They spend about 90% of their time not replicating. So we talked about that a bit in lesson 4 and 5. But a cancer cell, unfortunately, it replicates very, very quickly. And so we see the development of these tumors, these big groups of cells. A couple of notes about that. This happens way faster, like I mentioned. The cells are also organized differently. So they're kind of stacking up on top of each other. So I have a good video of this if you want to check it out, which you can find again underneath, which is the cancer cell division. So it's a really cool one to watch. It shows them sort of piling up on top of each other. Couple of things about how the cells actually look as well. And I mentioned here they can move them through the blood and lymphatic system. The blood system is like your veins and arteries. The lymphatic system is part of your immune system. So sending around those really great cells that fight off bacteria and viruses and so on. So again, more about this you can watch in the videos just below if you're interested. But I want to kind of compare when we look at normal and cancer cells. So here we have some normal cells, right? They're all sort of around the same shape. They all have one nucleus each, and they're sort of smooth around the edges. The cancer cells, they're kind of on top of each other. Like this big cell is on top of the other cells. Their nuclei are very large, okay? They're sort of rough around the edges. So I was mentioning before, it's possible to have a biopsy, which is that a doctor would remove a sample of cells and they would actually look at it under a microscope and they would examine these types of changes. So that's one way that doctors can actually help to diagnose certain types of cancers. You're going to look more into biopsy as an example when you work on that research assignment that's popping up on Classroom. So I want to just mention right here, cancer cells. They are not specialized, and we're going to talk about really soon is specialization. So that is essentially that a cell should have a special function, a special job, and also with that job comes a certain shape that it's going to look like. So cancer cells don't follow that regular pattern. And I just want to show over here, you see a bunch of these light pink cells. They're very like neatly organized. So let's say that these are skin cells, right? They're all sort of arranged in the same way. They're all similar shape and size. When a cancer cell starts dividing and forms a tumor, it does not match the surroundings, okay? And in other words, if it doesn't match the shape and it doesn't match the functionality, they actually are really not helpful to the body. And in fact, what they end up doing is actually taking lots of nutrients that the other cells might otherwise need. So this is how some cancers, the tumor can actually really damage or really affect the surrounding tissues. So you're going to read a bit more about that in the cancer assignment. Just to mention, as I said before, if these cells are able to metastasize, which means move away from the tumor, they can enter into veins and arteries nearby. And that sort of acts like a highway for those cells. They can basically travel anywhere else in the body, and that's called metastasis. So moving from the original area to another area. So that is one of the huge reasons why cancer is such a dangerous disease, because it's often not isolated to one place. Okay, so again, you're going to look more into that into this research assignment.